sadly, the fact that undergraduate degrees have almost all worthy degrees in science and engineering have stretched to 4 years, and some of that is because the curriculum covered at A-levels is not as broad as it used to be. I'm not saying, by the way, that that's a bad thing, but that's the only, so far that was the way the universities seemed to react to the breadth of knowledge not being covered by the time people were 18. But I recognise what she says, and I hope my honourable friend from Maidstone and Weald will pass on those thoughts to my right honourable friend for Havant on that particular barrier to becoming an engineer, which seems potentially quite arbitrary unless it is a curriculum issue. I seem to have skipped forward in my speech, Mr. Robertson. I appreciate I've been talking for some time, but I would like to cover just a few more issues, some of which are perhaps, when I've reported them in the past, I get accused of being a bit nutty about thinking people are sexist. But one of the things that we talked about also is about implementing unconscious bias training. And the simple way to say that is that unconscious bias training is simply a way to challenge people in their thinking about their instinctive bias. We all have it, by the way. Nobody can say that they're not biased at all. But it's just more of a sense check to people when they are recruiting, when they're promoting, when they're discussing talent. They're not just looking for people like themselves. So it's kind of stopping the mini-me syndrome that is evident. And I will give away in just a moment, but I think one of the most interesting witnesses that we had was British Aerospace. And they had taken unconscious bias training to quite a new level. All managers were being trained in it. When they had talent reviews, they made sure that women were represented in discussing this. Indeed, when they were talking about recruitment and promotions, what they made sure is that at least one of the people interviewing was a woman, and of the people that were interviewees, so interviewers, there was always at least one woman on the panel, and interviewees, there was always at least one woman on the panel. They have seen a significant change in their recruitment and promotion, and they believe that their business is better as a consequence of it. I want to pay tribute to them on that, and on that point I give way to my honourable friend. Right on.
Lady's very generous in taking a further intervention. I wonder if she'd agree with me that actually we ought to lead by example here, and there should be unconscious bias training for parliamentarians, and maybe a good time to do that is during the induction programme for new MPs, particularly if new male MPs have come from a male-dominated profession. I think they would benefit hugely from that kind of awareness raising around unconscious bias.
I welcome her thinking on that point, and I think she should write to the Speaker and to the Clerk to make that suggestion. I think it's a very good idea. I'm also keen. I would.
Thank you very much for giving way. On further to that point, do you not think it would be better for members of Parliament who've been here a long time to have that awareness raising, rather than the new members of Parliament who actually, I think those that came in 2010 do not have that bias in the way that maybe some older members do?
I won't take that personal.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. I'm sure nobody was talking about you. However, I recognise that too, and I don't want to get into all sorts of discussions that I've had with other colleagues, but I agree with both my honourable friends that this would be useful to do in the existing Parliament as well. I would.
My right honourable friend has been incredibly generous, and I really want to give a risk to her nil by saying that the oldest established law firm in our country routinely undertakes unconscious biasness training, and if it's good enough for them, it must be good enough for members of Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. I thank my honourable friend for that. I understand that BIS Management Board, including ministers, were invited to do unconscious bias training, although I believe only one minister was able to make it, and that was the honourable member for, I think, East Dunbartonshire. I think I can't say her name, obviously, due to our protocols, but I'll check with Hansard later. But getting back to that, I agree with her. I think that we should be proactive in doing this. And I think it's fair to say companies have offered to run these courses for MPs, and it's been on my to-do list for some time, and I will make sure that it gets done. Getting into other recommendations, normalising flexible and part-time working, we should be encouraging companies to review the culture within their organisations so that talent does not drain away from the pipeline unnecessarily. I think evidence shows that the best way of making that a standard practice is to make sure it's a non-gender issue, and I think that's very welcome indeed. Inspiring the next generation, companies already know that they have a role to inspire people in subject and career choices. And then I want to come finally, Mr. Robertson, on that particular point to our recommendation about headhunters. There is already a voluntary code of conduct, and I want to draw to the attention of the House the review undertaken by Charlotte Sweeney at the instigation of my right honourable friend, the member for Twickenham. It was launched earlier this week, and it was effectively having a look at the voluntary code of conduct that has been in place. We know that headhunters can play a very significant role in helping us reach Lord Davis's target of 25% female board members. So I welcome that report's ambition that the code should be a minimum standard and that our aspirations should be raised further. And to achieve this, we should encourage as many headhunters as possible to sign up to the code. One way of promoting the code would be for the government to lead by example, and this is where I'm encouraging the Cabinet Office to ensure that all the headhunters that are used by government and agencies today are signatories to that code. We know that is not the case right now. In fact, I remember a discussion with my right honourable friend from Meriden on this particular issue, and I'm taking it up further. The reports also... Sure.
On the issue of headhunters, I recently met with senior women in HE, in higher education, who cited headhunters, the very issue she's talking about, as they felt a barrier to their progression to very senior positions such as Vice-Chancellor in university. So I think that would be a very good measure she talks about.
Well, I find that fascinating, and I had not thought of higher education particularly, because I've been focusing on business largely, but I think that's something I'll add to the discussion that we'll be having with Cabinet Office advisors soon. I think the report also stated, Charlotte Sweeney's report also stated it would be a good step forward to extend the use of the code to the executive pipeline. Music to my ears, and something that we are seeking to persuade the government and indeed business more widely that this is a good initiative to back. It's where the most difficult challenges lie, but which is vital to ensuring long-term progress. As I've suggested, that was a recommendation of the report I co-authored, and I'm looking forward to the forthcoming Headhunter Summit, which my honourable friend, the member for Maidstone and Weald, is chairing alongside myself and my honourable friend from Brentford and Isleworth, to have that very discussion on what's happening to the code, how can we improve it, has it had an impact, and what can we do to extend it further. And I'm quite excited by this initiative that will be happening within the next month. Locally too, we in Suffolk recognise the value of women's contribution to the economy, and I pay tribute to the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, which has launched a campaign to help women fulfil their economic potential. It's fair to say locally that the report established that over a career, a woman working full-time in Suffolk will earn £332,000 less than a man, and also pay £83,000 less in tax. So the LEP is right to note that these employment and pay gaps in effect represent lost income for families, lost opportunity for growth, and lost prosperity for the country. Mr. Robertson, I've spoken for considerably longer than is my usual want in debates, but I felt that the report that we put together last year, and that we are continuing to follow up the recommendations, deserved a good airing in Parliament. This is something around which all of us can unite, in my belief. Although on this side of the House I expect we're not keen to go for legislation where there may be ambition elsewhere. But I think that there are a number of initiatives that we should be supporting. We should be pleased that 37% of start-up loans went to women. We should be pleased by the recommendations and the initiatives undertaken by the Women's Business Council. And we should be pleased to see that this agenda is firmly on the map as far as government is concerned, and indeed the opposition. It is too much of a waste for our economy to not have those women that want to work working at the top of our industries, at the top of our universities, at the top of our public sector. And on that, Mr. Robertson, I commend that we all put our shoulder to the big stone and we keep pushing.